It is a great honor to welcome Michael Walzer once again to the show. He is a professor emeritus of the Institute for Advanced Studies. The last time we met, we discussed his essay on liberties titled On Moral Concern. And right now, he's written another piece on the newest issue of Liberties. It is titled The Left and the Nation State. How are you today, Michael? Thank you for joining the show once again.
I'm pretty good, yes. Glad that you're doing this.
Yes, I'm glad to have you join us too. But before we begin, I would like to spend a few minutes discussing your latest book. It's titled The Struggle for a Decent Politics on Liberal as an Adjective. I've read a few pages of it. I enjoy it a lot. I would recommend it to anybody who cares about preserving liberalism. I should like to begin by asking you about the title of the book. A decent politics. Well, didn't Machiavelli tell us that political power is earned through force and fraud? I mean, where's the decency in that?
Machiavelli and the Prince, yes, but Machiavelli in the discourses was actually a good small R Republican with a strong commitment to citizenship. Yeah, decency is actually a minimal goal. And it seems that in the world today, we should at least begin with decency. I would like to go on to justice and equality and other descriptions of political ambition. But I think decency right now is an important goal.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting here in Budapest, Hungary. Is close to Vienna. And Hungary is currently ruled by a man who calls himself an illiberal Democrat. And I think the international community has taken that to heart. So it's being a liberal necessary to being a Democrat, and of course, vice versa?
Well, I think it's necessary if democracy is to avoid um, um, an arbitrary, unrestrained majority rule, which is often represented by a maximal leader who claims to embody this majority and to speak in its name. Democracy without the liberal adjective has tended often to empower demagogues who make this claim: "I am the people," and it is a version of a very bad politics from the old days. L'état c'est moi, as Louis, one of the Louis, said in pre-revolutionary France. So yes, I think democracy has to operate within a set of constraints that guarantee the ongoingness of democracy. That is to say, that guarantee the right of opposition, the right of the freedom of the press and of assembly, just to make sure that democratic decisions are always, or democratic rule is always temporary, because the political argument goes on, and the political argument has to be guaranteed against any kind of illiberal attacks. It can be guaranteed by a system of checks and balances, by a constitution enforced by a Supreme Court, an independent court, but there has to be a promise to the people that this moment, this election, is a legitimate victory but it is a temporary victory, and the political arguments are going to go on. There will be another election, and so on.
Mhm,
And that's what the liberal adjective guarantees,
mhm.
or that's what it means.
Yes. So in the book, you quoted the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times columnist Bret Stephens when he says, "Populism is the triumph of democracy over liberalism." Uh,
Yes,
do you side
and I
with
think
his?
he means majoritarian democracy
Yes.
over liberal constraint.
Mhm,
Yes, I have a lot of disagreements with Bret Stephens, but I very much like that quote,
mhm,
that line.
mhm. Perhaps one of the foremost philosophical, I guess, critics of liberalism is today is Patrick Deneen of Notre Dame University. He recently came out with a new book, Regime Change Towards a Post-Liberal Future. And he argues that liberalism is inherently elitist because in order to be able to be part of the ruling class, so to speak, you have to buy into the same like liberal, I guess, tenets and pieties of this class, and therefore it can be an obstruction to truly pluralist thinking. I wonder if what would be your response
I,
to that?
I've been reading Patrick Deneen. There are two Patrick Deneens. Deneen one, who wrote Why Liberalism Failed, and Deneen two, very different, who wrote this book about regime change. Um, uh, I have many criticisms of Deneen's work, but a critique of elitism makes no sense from him because he believes in an elite, and this the argument that um, the populist revolt against liberalism is being badly led, he says, by people like Trump or maybe Orban. What it needs is the leadership of um, an elite committed to classical and Christian values. Um, and he imagines an elite of this sort creating with populist support, creating a new society and ruling it. He is quite unabashed in extolling the necessity of and the value of a, a I don't know, an Aristotelian Thomist elite. Um, so yes, liberalism. One of the products of liberalism is, or one of the natural consequences of liberalism is meritocracy. The Enlightenment slogan, "Career open to talents," points to a meritocracy. But if you try to imagine a liberal meritocracy, it would be one that would be whose powers would be constrained. And crucially, the, um, the person who wins whose merit bring him a professional license as a doctor or a lawyer, a liberal meritocracy would make it very clear that license is a license that relates only to the practice of medicine or of law. It brings with it no other benefits. A liberal meritocracy would be one that would work against what Shakespeare called the insolence of office. And one of Deneen's legitimate criticisms is of the insolence of some of our current meritocrats.
Mhm. Well, to quote part of your book, today I think liberals like us are best described in moral rather than political or cultural terms. We are, or we aspire to be, open-minded, generous, and tolerant. We are able to live with ambiguity. We are ready for arguments that we don't feel we have to win. Whatever our ideology, whatever our religion, we are not dogmatic. We are not fanatics. Or as the actress Lauren Bacall told an interviewer, a liberal is someone who doesn't have a small mind. So
Yes,
for all his, for all his criticisms of liberalism, Patrick Deneen sort of hit this one point in that he believes that both the Republican and the Democratic Party has an inkling of liberalism in them. And while he finds that to be something to condemn, I suppose you and I find that to be something praiseworthy in that I always find that the political language of the United States to put liberal as opposed to conservative is mistaken because you can be a liberal social democrat and also a liberal traditionalist or conservative, and also, as you've mentioned, a liberal socialist or a liberal communitarian. Right.
yes. Our political language is peculiar in part because liberalism in the United States is generally New Deal liberalism. It is our very modest version of social democracy, and we should call it that. That's actually what it is. In Europe, or in much of Europe, liberalism is a laissez-faire, an ideology of laissez-faire, of a minimal state, a free market. And in the United States, that doctrine is called conservative. In fact, if you take it really seriously, it's a very radical doctrine. I think I say somewhere in the book, but Robert Nozick, the libertarian philosopher who really believed in a genuinely free market without all the state subsidies and guarantees that exist, he said that he thought a revolution to establish capitalism in the United States would be justified, meaning we don't have anything like that. So maybe it's right to say that the Republican version of the free market is conservative because it isn't really free.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Robert Nozick, whom I find a lot of value in reading. And I've also learned that you I guess, taught a class with him when you guys were back in Harvard, and on
Yes,
the subject of capitalism and socialism. So, what can you recall about that particular experience, and of course, Robert Nozick himself?
it was a course taught, I think, in actually in the philosophy department, or it had a number of, and we had a large student body, and the course was an argument, a debate, really. The formula was he would give two lectures expounding some part of his libertarian doctrine. I would respond with a critique, one lecture, and then he would respond to my critique. And then I would give two lectures defending my version of socialism. And he would critically respond and I would reply. And then he would give two lectures. And that was the course. I don't think I ever worked as hard as I worked in that course. Bob Nozick was certainly smarter than me and much, much quicker on his feet. So it it was a wonderful experience, and we were good friends. Then we would go and play handball after one of these classes. Go to the Harvard gym. And we remained friends despite the fierceness of some of the debates. And I think his book and my book both came out of that. I took a much longer time than he did, but Anarchy, State, and Utopia and Spheres of Justice are both the products of that course. Now, it was taught in 71, I think, academic year 71, 72. So even if he won the arguments intellectually, I had the sympathy of most of the students.
Yes. And I also recall that 71 was the year when Rawls's A Theory of Justice was published, right? And Rawls was a Harvard professor as well.
Yes, and both of us had read that book in mimeograph chapters had been circulating in the years before the publication of the book.
Yes, I'm very much grateful for Rawls and his book A Theory of Justice for introducing me to the subject of political philosophy.
Yeah.
And of course, I went right into reading Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia to get the right arguments to show that Rawls is wrong. But that's a conversation for another day. So to segue into our next topic, which is your liberties essay, you mentioned in the book, The Struggle for Decent Politics, a text titled Liberal Nationalism by the Israeli intellectual and sometimes politician, Yael Tamir. I certainly hope I pronounced that correctly. Her book was originally a doctoral dissertation written at Oxford, the supervisor being one Isaiah Berlin, who I think is the greatest exponent of liberalism of the 20th century. So why don't you tell us what the book is about and what influence it may have had on you?
Well, it is a defense of nationalism when it is constrained by the adjective liberal. And that book and also Carlo Rosselli's Liberal Socialism are the books that started me thinking about the adjective liberal. But the crucial, what is crucial about liberal nationalism is that the idea is to recognize the legitimacy of a people's desire for collective self-determination while setting limits on that desire. And the limits are both external and internal. The external limit is that you have to recognize that other people have the same desire for collective self-determination. So you have to be willing to support what I call the nation that comes next. And also a liberal nationalism would require full equality for national, ethnic, religious minorities within the nation state. And her book is a working out of those limits on nationalism.
Right. So I believe the earliest mention of nations, and as in different nations of different peoples, is obviously in the book of Genesis, when there was a time when the people were of one nation, they spoke of one tongue, and they tried to build a tower that reaches to the high heavens, and God decided that that was not to be, and he destroyed the tower, and then everyone spoke of a different language, and therefore different nations were formed. Should we see that the destruction of the Tower of Babel as a tragedy or as a sign of diversity
Um, yeah, I am inclined to the belief that um, the tower represents what it actually what the biblical writer is remembering. That is the Assyrian Empire and its extraordinary imperial constructions. Yes, so I think that there could not have been a single people over the face of the earth with a single history, a single culture, without imperial repression. So yes, the dispersal of and the creation of the nations, this was a good thing.
I see. So I'm guessing that would make you stand out against the imperialists because for the entirety of world history, not just Western history, the world has consisted of large empires taking over smaller nation states. In fact, the history of the nation state of Israel is such the triumph of the nation state over a succession of empires. So, how would you make the case that the nation state is a better model of like political social organization?
Yeah. Well, there is, as I say in the article, there's more to be said for empires than leftists are usually willing to say, because they have been, once the conquest is complete, they have often been tolerant of difference within, and they have brought peace often to warring groups within the area that they conquer and control. So imperialism has made sometimes for pluralism and for peace, but it is inherently foreign rule, and it is inherently and necessarily undemocratic. And as soon as you get any kind of politics aiming at the empowerment of ordinary people, you get nationalism. And then the only way to accommodate that nationalism is to break up the empires and create nation states, which will not necessarily be democratic, but they can be. They are potentially democratic, and they reflect in their. If you think about the struggle, what we call the national liberation struggle, this is often, always, I think, a struggle that has a lot of popular support because of this desire to create a place, a political place where they have a feeling that they belong, that it's their own, and that they can determine its future. So if you could imagine a divine imperialism, a global empire ruled by God, then the pluralism and the peace might be better than the disorder of a world of nation states. But no empire has been ruled by God, so we have dealt with human rulers, and on balance, the nation state offers a chance for a better kind of government than the imperial bureaucrats provided. And look, from the perspective of the left, which is a point I think needs to be made again and again, the only political space within which the democratic left has had any success is the nation state.
Mhm.
The glory years of social democracy coincided with the end of World War II and the consolidation of a nation state system in most of Europe. Not where you are now. That it required the breakup of the Soviet Empire in order to create nation states in Eastern Europe. And then, as we can see, you have to struggle for democracy or social democracy in each state. But it is a place where, in principle, at least, the struggle is possible.
Mhm. Well, since you've mentioned the continent of Europe, so right now we're still witnessing the comings and goings uh, of the European experiment, that is the European Union, and there have been a lot of clarion calls against the European Union because it tampers with this idea of the nation state. Britain has voiced its opposition, so has the government of this country, Hungary, and I believe Greece and others have, and Poland too, have voiced their opposition too. So, is the existence of this supranational organization threaten the idea of the nation state in Europe in any sense?
Well, there is both right and left opposition to the union, and the left opposition is precisely based on the history of left success in individual nation states and democratic persistence in at least some of them. The question for me is always whether it is possible to imagine Europe as a political place. You know, I define political place in the article as a place where self-determination is possible because there is sufficient solidarity or sufficient cohesion among the citizens and the sufficient recognition of mutuality within these boundaries. Is Europe a political place of that sort? And I think there is at least some evidence that it is on the way to becoming a political place like that. And then the question is whether there can be a hierarchy of political places such that the European Union is the political place of the European people, while within the European Union there is room for I don't want to say subordinate, but coexisting political places for Germany, France, Italy, of the other historical peoples within Europe. And that's a question that can only be worked out over time. There has to be some solution to the democracy deficit in the EU. There have to be, as there maybe there has started to be, there have to be European-wide political parties, which also have branches, and so that there could be a European-wide social democratic party, which is composed in some federal fashion of the social democratic parties of Germany, Italy, etc. Yeah, so I think this is an experiment in a new in a new form of in a new political formation, and we don't know if it's going to work.
Mhm.
And I think, in a way, the war, the Russian attack on Ukraine, is a challenge. Um, it's interesting that Ukraine is a nation state in the classical form with a fierce national history. Um, and yet it wants to join the EU. Um, so what is going on there? There is a sense of, in Ukraine, we want to be Europeans. We also want to be Ukrainians. And then the question is, how do those two identities fit together, if they fit together? Um, and I tend to be optimistic. I think one thing that the EU would guarantee is no war among its members. And given the history of Europe, that would be a great achievement.
I think so too. So the democratic deficit of the European Union is also a problem that puzzles the great German thinker Jürgen Habermas. And I think Habermas has a different view of nationalism in that he believes that the sentiments that fuels nationalism is always comes when a nation or a people is under threat, either by multiculturalism from within or globalism or globalization from without. And he sees these movements mostly on the right, and that sort of confirms his theories. But how would say a nationalist from the left repel both, I guess, disagree, criticize Habermas's views, and also repels these nativistic nationalism from the right?
Yes. Well, I think that many of the so-called threats to the nation are fabricated by the right for the sake of a fiercer, less illiberal nationalism. I remember I mentioned this in the article. Some years ago, a right-wing Polish politician opposed the admission of 5,000 Syrian refugees because he thought it would undermine the Polishness of Poland. Um, well, there are 38 million Poles. It doesn't seem that 5,000 Syrians could possibly be a threat. But the threat of immigration, as immigration challenging the culture, and ending the history or of ending the history, the continuous history of this people. I think most of those threats are not real, and the role of a liberal nationalist in Poland would be to say we can be quite generous in response to the Syrian civil war without endangering the Polishness of Poland. We need greater confidence in the strength of our culture and our history. So yes, nationalism under threat is a vicious nationalism, but it's not the only kind of nationalism. And we know that there are Polish, French, German liberal nationalists who are defending the nation and denying the threats. Now, The American story is different because there isn't an American nation. We are a multinational, multiracial, multi-everything society. And it is true that the white majority may, I think this is far from certain, may become a minority over the next decades or even the next century, if you think that far ahead. But those of us who think of ourselves as Americans would say, well, that's perfectly consistent with the history and culture of America. Um, uh, the arrival of new immigrants has been the story of the country and the story of the success of the country. But there is now an effort to create a white Christian nationalism and to fabricate a whole series of threats. And we have to say, no, those aren't threats. And you can defend an American, I don't know, multi-nation, an American trans nation, without defending a fabricated past, Christian national past. They actually get the founding completely wrong. The founding wasn't Christian. It may have been white, but it was a pluralist white, and it definitely wasn't Christian. One of my favorite stories about the founders, the early republic, is that they insisted that the mail, which was the federal post office should deliver mail 7 days a week because it was not legitimate to recognize a religious day of rest. The state could not do that, they thought. So that's our history.
Yes. So I think there's still like a debate on whether the founding of the American Republic should be emphasized on the Mayflower Pilgrims, who were staunchly religious. We've talked about this, Puritans, and the founders, the people who fought in the American Revolution and who signed the Declaration of Independence, who were Enlightenment deists.
Yes, yes. We have been a home for religiously persecuted groups, but also for other kinds of groups in trouble abroad, many other kinds.
So going back to the example of Europe, Habermas also mentioned the example of German reunification back in 89-90. And he, even though he welcomed the idea of German unification, he worried that West Germany might use this opportunity to subsume the nation state of East Germany, and whether or not whatever we feel about the legitimacy of the East German state, we must admit that for a time it was a legitimate nation state, and the process of reunification may be translated as West Germany annexing East Germany. And I wonder, 30 or so years on, has that been a reality? Has East Germany and West Germany worked out their differences?
Well, if there seriously were two Germanys, two German peoples, two German histories, two different German cultures, then I would probably favor some version of either autonomy or secession. But there isn't. I mean, all through the period from 45 until the reunion, people in East and West Germany thought that they were part of one country. East Germany may have been a legitimate state. It wasn't a legitimate nation state because there was no distinct separate nation. So, but that's I would not if Habermas believes that the people of East Germany represented a distinct national or even ethnic group distinct from the people of West Germany, then yes, he should have opposed reunion.
I see. And that does bring us to the question of whether a national liberation movement is legitimate or not. So we see that there are still currently peoples who are desperately fighting for a nation. You see the Kurdish people, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, but we also see the existence of the Turkish Northern Cyprus and Russia trying to create two autonomous regions in the Donbass. So how can we tell the difference between a legitimate nation state, national self-determination movement, and an illegitimate one?
Well, the great power in foreign intervention is likely to distort the story. Imagine, say, there are people in Quebec who want independence. There seems to be a strong majority that want some kind of autonomy, but not independence. Imagine that France, an all-powerful French army, invaded Canada to liberate Quebec. And the claim would be this was a national liberation struggle. I don't think that that qualifies as national liberation, nor does the Russian role in East Ukraine or if the Indians were to invade Tibet and set it free. I don't. That's not national liberation. National liberation has to be a struggle from within, and it has to be a political struggle governed by democratic principles, so that the Quebecois nationalists or the Scottish nationalists or the Catalan nationalists have to prove that they have the support of a majority of their own people. And they have to prove it politically without the help of a foreign power. So what makes national liberation legitimate is precisely the independence and the democratic commitments of the liberationists. And one of the reasons that I have always opposed terrorism as a version of national liberation struggle is because terrorism is an elite activity. It is the work of a few who have failed to mobilize their own people. It is an expression of that failure. We know enough about, let's say, the history of the FLN in Algeria to know that there were people within the National Liberation Movement who said no to terrorism, no bombs in a cafe where French kids are sitting around. Don't do that. The road to national liberation is through mass struggle, general strikes, civil disobedience. And if you imagine a national liberation struggle of that sort, its likely end product would be a democratic Algeria rather than the authoritarian Algeria that the terrorists produced. So yes, I am I think we can distinguish just and unjust national liberation movements.
Right. So I believe it was the John Hopkins professor Yasha Monk, whose outlet Persuasion you appear on frequently. He wrote in his latest book, The Great Experiment, that we should introduce a form of civic nationalism in place of ethnic nationalism, and that he believes the U.S. and right now France can be the leading light in that because the U.S., unlike many European countries, is not defined by its founders as a country where the ethnic or the religious majority defines its national character. And France, credits to President Macron for upholding this principle of civic nationalism against both left-wing and right-wing threats. So what's your view on civic nationalism?
Well, in the United States, we are indeed held together by political commitments. It's the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, it's July 4th, Memorial Day. America has a civic culture that makes possible our unity despite the multiplicity of religious, ethnic, racial, et cetera, et cetera. At least ideally, that's the way it should be. I don't know what civic nationalism would mean in a country which has a very, very long history, a dominant majority with a language and a culture, perhaps a religion of its own. Does civic nationalism in France mean that you can't celebrate Bastille Day because that's a day that can't possibly have meaning to people who come from North Africa? Bastille Day is as specifically French as Christmas is to Britain, where it's a national holiday. It seems to me, yes, the French have every reason to emphasize we are a democracy. We believe in equal citizenship. We want the revolutionary principles of equality, fraternity, et cetera, to be recognized and to be an important part of our culture. But you can't eliminate the feeling of Frenchness and the desire to sustain that sense of this is who we are. In fact, the example of France is not really a civic nation. It has been remarkably successful in turning immigrants up until the very big Muslim immigration. It's been remarkably successful in turning immigrants from, say, Eastern Europe into French men and women who speak French, who think of themselves as French, who eat and talk like French people. I don't see how. It just seems to me to be too kind of philosophically high-minded to try to avoid all that.
Well, I suppose a current experiment in the struggle between ethno-religious and civic nationalism is the nation state of Israel, where I suppose it was 5 years ago, right? In 2018, there was this thing called the Basic Law, which states that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And it caused a huge controversy because the nation state within its borders has
Right.
a substantial minority of Arabs. And
Right.
so what were your thoughts on the Basic Law when it was first enacted then versus now?
Well, I was very much opposed to the law. All my friends in Israel were opposed to it, but it's also false. Israel is not the nation state of the Jewish people, because I am a member of the Jewish people, and I am not allowed to vote in Israel. Now, I understand that Hungarians who live in what used to be the empire do vote in Hungarian elections.
Yeah.
There is a sense in which you might say that Hungary is the nation state of the Hungarian people. But Israel is not the nation state. It is the nation state of its inhabitants who are its citizens and who vote in its elections. Now, it is also a Jewish state in the sense that Norway is a Norwegian state. Um, uh, and I don't think it should be a Jewish state in any other sense. You should separate synagogue and state the way we separate church and state here. It should be a firm separation. And the equality in principle of Arab citizens of Israel should be made equality in fact. And that can be done in a variety of ways. Now, what does that mean about things like the calendar of the country? Hanukkah is a Jewish holiday. It is also in Israel a national holiday. So what do I think about that? Well, I would argue that the national majority has a right to shape the national calendar the way Christians do in the United States. Sunday is a national holiday. It's the day now when mail is not delivered. Christmas is effectively a national holiday. And I have always been against those groups of atheists, Jews, Muslims, who oppose the setting up of a creche in the central square of a town. The town where I lived in Western Pennsylvania, there was always a creche in Central Square, put up by the city. And there were always some atheists who said, no, this violated the church-state division. The Jews, we were quiet, which was prudent and sensible, I thought. Why shouldn't a national majority, a huge national majority, be allowed to express its culture so long as the expressions are not oppressive to the rest of us? And so long as there is room in the society for us to celebrate our holidays. So I want to recognize and allow the ordinary feelings of men and women who have a history and a culture and a religion and a tradition of celebrations. I want to allow that. And if there is a huge Muslim, Christian, or Jewish majority, let those holidays be recognized in the society as a whole, recognized in the sense that you don't deliver the mail, you close the schools. But make sure that minority groups have plenty of room for their own expressions and for their own holidays, and that there is they have no sense, they don't have to have a sense that somehow they have to hide what they are doing.
So, final question. You ended the essay with this quote, men and women on the left know how to organize political parties, labor unions, and social movements in the places where they currently live. They wouldn't know how to organize among the global multitudes, billions of people speaking 1,000 languages with radically different religions and political cultures. Solidarity with humanity is no doubt a fine thing, and help for embattled peoples abroad is morally necessary, but leftists should realize that they need fellow citizens. So
Yeah.
we began this talk with the allegory of the Tower of Babel, and I think there are more than enough people on the cosmopolitan left, so to speak, who would like to build a Babel 2.0, so to speak. They would say that the idea of nation state itself is exclusionary, and that with all of these globalization, multiculturalism, the internet, universal human rights, etc., then we are up for another go. So, how would you remind them of the importance of the nation state?
Well, I would just remind them of where their political struggle against global warming or their political struggle for universal human rights, where that struggle begins. It begins where they live. It begins in the nation state. There has been no success in organizing. See, I expressed my hope for some success in Europe in this regard, but there has been no success in organizing effective transnational, universal, cosmopolitan social movements or political parties. The fight for all of the things we value begins in the nation state, and of course we want nation states to form to make commitments to each other about climate warming. We want them to make commitments to the UN Charter on Human Rights. But we begin fighting for those commitments right here where we are. And it's hard to imagine any other place. I do believe in something like internationalism. Internationalism is not cosmopolitanism. Cosmopolitanism would abolish borders. Internationalism assumes the existence of nations and wants cooperation across borders. And that seems to me to be what we should be doing. And the example is NATO and America and most of the EU supporting Ukraine right now. That is an example of internationalist solidarity across borders. But the argument about how much support and whether to continue supporting, that's an argument that's going to go on in every nation state. And I don't see any other place where it could go on if it is to be a democratic argument.
Well, on that wonderful note, thank you very much, Michael Walzer of the Institute for American Advanced Studies, for joining the show.
Thank you for organizing this interview.
Thank you. And of course, have a happy early 4th of July.
Thank you for that. Yes, I am not a nationalist, but I am a patriot.
Okay. Thank you very much and take care.
Yeah.